Greetings, salutations, buenos dias, and all the other forms of hello. How are you? How are you doing on this day? To everyone who is here and who might be here, will be here, could be here, maybe should be here, but we're not into shoulds. So to all of you, welcome. Wherever you are, some of you are not here in the morning, and that's fine. We don't discriminate based on time zone. We're not into time zone discrimination. We are not time zonists here at the 11th house. And I hope your day has been uh, a meaningful day, a meaningful day. In a world where meaning is disappearing as rapidly as the blue spotted skink. I just made that up. But you know it. You get my drift. That meaning is something that is undervalued, very undervalued. Or nihilism seems to be creeping across the realm. Meaning is something that is very undervalued and underrated. So again, when I say that, I'm not saying it out of any sense of um, platitude. I truly mean it. So here we go. It's the Astro Weather. We got a good group in here. We got 61 early risers and other fellow travelers in the realm, and we're gonna get the world is weird. The world is weird. We have a link for 15 minutes in the show description, which you can check out and join in on the conversation when we're done here. We'll talk about Diddy's flight from the U.S. I guess he's trying to get to Cape Verde where they don't have any extradition laws, but apparently that's run into a snag. We also have a very interesting event that took place in Maryland, although I think the people in Maryland would not use the word interesting. A container ship rammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Some fascinating symbolism around that, and particularly, well, we'll get into it. So we have a couple different things to talk about over on 15 minutes, but right now we're here to talk about the weather. So let's get into it. We're still kind of in the this eclipse phase with the moon, and you can see it here. And even though we've already theoretically experienced the eclipse, this is the chart for today, which is very similar to the chart that we looked at on Sunday night. So we're still, even though it's not completely eclipsed, we're still in that eclipse energy because we are dealing with the nodes and the Saros cycle, which is connected to the precession of the nodes in every 19, close to 19 years. And one of the things that we talked about on Sunday night is in this configuration, we have a classic bucket chart with the moon being at the focal point. So we've talked about the various charts before, and the key to having a bucket chart, which I have, it's a fairly common chart. It's not uncommon. I say the most uncommon chart is the whatchamacallit. Oh, God, I'm drawing a blank. Well, I would say that the seesaw chart is pretty uncommon. It's pretty uncommon. The bundle chart is the most uncommon. When you see a chart where there are planets really between three houses, those are very, very uncommon charts. And outside of those three houses, it's like that person doesn't even really exist. But the seesaw chart's pretty uncommon. I have to say that of all the Jones types, the most common would be probably the bucket chart, and then I would say maybe the spread, right, where the entire chart is filled with. It's like 9 out of the 12 houses have planets in them. And then I would probably go with maybe the seesaw, right? That'd be 3. Then I would go with the splay. And then maybe somewhere between the locomotive and the bowl. The bowl chart is when the chart is split completely in half. Either from this side of the chart or this side of the chart or this, right? It's going to occupy half the chart. And then the last one is the bundle chart. So there you go. But today we have, again, classic bucket chart with the moon coming out of this eclipse action being the focal point. And it's really interesting. I was on Twitter yesterday, and there was an astrologer, albeit a young astrologer, and posted something about how the moon in Libra, the moon in Libra on the eclipse is going to make women more moody, and that the sun in Aries eclipsed is going to make men more aggressive. And I thought to myself, well, how much more fucking basic can you get? And this is, again, I'm running a judgment program in my brain. I know I'm being judgmental, but I'm running a judgment program in my brain. And then I look at the interaction with that tweet, and it had like 500,000 views or some shit like that. It had 260 retweets. And I thought to myself, what am I doing wrong? Right. And then the level of interactivity, I'm just going to say this. Okay. I know it sounds judgmental. I'm hanging out there. That's my moon. That's the Libra moon. That is actually my moon. I'm hanging out there. But I looked at it and I said to myself, I can understand why people think astrology is superstitious bullshit. I'm serious. And I don't believe that, by the way. But I could see that based on that tweet and then all the other comments that followed. And I had a moment, a brief moment where I was like slightly embarrassed to be an astrologer. It was, and again, I'm doing my best to stay out of that judgment lane, but it was like, this is what passes for an exchange, high exchange of information. Anyway, that's the moon. Like, that was the moon sort of sticking out like a sore thumb when I watched that. But getting back to it, again, today, what are we focusing on? We have to reconcile whatever's at the focal point of the bucket chart, right? We have to reconcile this for 2 reasons. One, because if we reconcile this, then this part of the chart operates more easily. And then everything kind of flows into a unified and integrated expression of whatever the focal point is. So if this were the chart of an individual, I would say this individual has to be able to manage their relationships and manage their relationships in a way that's equal and balanced and fair to the other person and fair to the individual. I mean, this is one of the challenges of Libra. Libra can be over fair sometimes, depending upon what's going on in the individual's chart, the individual's life, right? So it's a balancing act. It's like Carl Walenda. That's how Libra isn't always balanced, but Libra actually is in the act of balancing. So if this was an individual's chart, I said, well, you got to figure this out. This is an important part of your chart. Also, the mother plays a huge role here. And because the moon is the mother, it's like, well, what role does the mother play in relationship? Are you looking for your mother? Does she overshadow the relationships that you bring into your life? Right? Do you find male or female? And for a woman, it would be the same, right? This would be the mother in the chart. Is the mother judgmental? Does the mother cast aspersion upon whoever it is you bring in? Anyway, I'm just giving you an example of how you would look at this from an individual's chart. And obviously, as we move through the day, these planets are going to move around the wheel. So we're just having a momentary conversation about where it is now. That said, it is in Libra. So we are looking at relationships today. We are looking at the give and take of relationship, the give and take of property, because the moon also represents your residence and your home and your property. The shared sort of commitments and workload, right? Like where's the balance in those things? Are you leaning into being too much of a caretaker? Are you subconsciously, and what's interesting about this chat group? I would say that there's such a high degree of self-awareness that it would almost be redundant for me to ask you these questions. And I'll extend that out to people that are watching this video, because that's my experience with you, right? But if you're new and you're just coming in on the Astro Weather and some of the things that we talk about, these are questions that you want to have kind of an inner dialogue with. Are you leaning too much into other people to take care of your emotional needs? Right? This is one of those days where it sort of pops out. And there's nothing wrong with getting support. This would actually be a good day if you are, again, conscious and aware and you want feedback, or you want to have some kind of an exchange where you do get emotional support, or therapy. If you have a therapy session lined up today, if you're doing counseling, this would be a really good day for that, because you'd be able to get into the nuts and the bolts and the inner workings of the emotional dynamics in your life. And the thing that's always interesting about Libra is that it's mental. So the processing that goes on isn't always emotional, right? You're processing through a mental construct. And a lot of Librans and people who have a Libra moon is that we experience empathy mentally. And as somebody who is the owner of a Libra moon, or I guess I'm leasing the moon in this lifetime. We're all just leasing whatever these aspects are. But that's how I experience empathy. I have a mental construct of what it's like to be that person, or to understand their life from pictures in my head. Like I put myself in their shoes. It is not a visceral emotional response, because the moon in the air signs is not wired that way. Moon and water, you will have a visceral emotional response. You will feel it. But moon and air signs tend to be more objective. So again, this is one of those days where you don't have to have a Libra moon, but if you wanted to step out of emotional turmoil, right, the Libra moon gives you the opportunity to be to be a bit objective and say, well, let me put myself into that person's position. How does that feel? What does it look like? It's like, oh, it feels tight. The clothes feel tight, or whatever, right? So that's a big part of it. So the bulk of the day is really going to be dependent upon your emotions and how you handle your emotions and how you're able to balance your emotional needs versus the needs of the other and or others. And it unlocks the rest of the chart. And when you're able to do that, then I think there's tremendous power in this moon where your relationship with the world becomes balanced and fair and objective and integrated. We talk about the term individuation a lot, which is a Jungian term. And this is one of those days where we're looking at the moon through the lens of individuation, the blending and the integrating of the totality of one's experience so that the emotional body is online, conscious, aware, self-aware, and available. It'll be an interesting day in terms of feedback from other people as well, because in as much as we have this bucket alliance here where the rest of the chart is dependent upon the individual's ability to manage this part of the chart, there are also some other aspects going on. So Mercury was in opposition to the moon, and it still is, but it's beginning to separate a little bit. And Mercury in Aries, shoots from the hip, just shoots from the hip. It doesn't have a lot of filter, right? And Libra filters. That's one of the things that Libra does. Libra will always assess, well, how will this affect the other? Or how will this be interpreted? Will I be too coarse? Will I be too unfiltered? Aries doesn't really care about that. Aries is all about getting out the message or communicating directly. Libra doesn't always communicate directly. Libra can dress things up in a lot of fancy words and prose, but it's not always direct, right? So we have this, and this was more to the point yesterday than today, where there was an interesting tension between taking in the consideration of how other people might feel versus getting your point across. It's still in the air. It is still in the air, especially over the next couple of hours. The moon will, in fact, let me rephrase that and realign that. It's going to be more in the air over the next couple hours because we know the moon is moving faster than Mercury. So as we go through the day, that dilemma is going to become more of a dilemma. But again, if you're going to communicate directly, everything is going to have to run through this moon. So the challenge is the lag time between saying what you need to say and then going through the Libra moon and all the possible bullet points and litigation details in your brain. Well, if I say this, then this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, or this. And it may not necessarily be a bad thing. I'll tell you where you probably need to employ this is on social media. I would definitely employ this on social media. So if you're out there, you're posting, you're tweeting, you're on Facebook, you're doing IG, I think you need to run what you're saying through that Libra moon and try to come up with something that is clear and direct, but at the same time straddles the line between your perspective and the perspective of the other, right? Something that's laser focused and fair, which is not always easy because Aries is all about now. That's what Aries is about. And Libra is all about, well, do you think now is the time? Is now the time? Because you check with the other, right? Is now the time? Yeah, now it's okay now, but not Aries. They're very different in terms of their dynamic. Libra is looking for permission through the social contract. Aries doesn't care about permission. So we're really on a string here, and it's going to get more intense over the day. Now, let's say you're on the recipient of somebody who hasn't listened to today's Astro Weather. Then what do you do about that? Because that happens too, right? Somebody's the mouth and somebody's the ears. Somebody's the mouth and somebody's the ears, and hopefully we're both. It's funny how the moon almost resembles an ear, doesn't it? If there was any body part that the moon would resemble in shape, it would be an ear. So what happens if somebody that you're dealing with is more coarse or more direct or um, shooting from their hip without running through their filter? Well, now it's on you. There is this concept. I think it's still around, but there's this concept called holding space. Like I'm going to hold space for that person. And I remember I was at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and I was interviewing somebody there. It was a woman who was a researcher, and they're all into psychic research and telepathic research and stuff like that. And I don't know how I was interviewing her for this company I was working for, and I don't know how I got into the subject or the topic. And I said, let's talk about the burden of holding space for another person. And you should have seen her eyes light up. And she was like, somebody gets it. Because that was a thing, right? Like you hold the space for another person to show up. And that's a lot of responsibility. And in many ways, it's a thankless fucking job. And yes, it's true. Like, you hold the space for people to show people that you don't always get along with or particularly like family members, but you hold that space. But at some point, it's like, well, why is the burden of holding the space put on you? Is it because you're more conscious, you're more aware? As a result of that, do you just have more responsibility because the other people don't? And what takes them off the hook for fucking holding space? So I was going through this in my brain at that time, just in my life in general. It was something and I brought it up to this woman, and she was like, oh my God, like somebody gets it, right? And today's one of those days. Today is one of those days. And you have to figure out Libra is a transactional sign. It is a transactional sign that is based on agreement and contract. It's up to you if you want to hold the space. You can hold the space temporarily. You don't have to hold the space for the rest of the day or the rest of the week or the rest of the month or the rest of the year, rest of your life. Right? You can hold the space for however long you need to, and you can say, I'm not holding this space anymore because I keep holding this space and this person keeps showing up as a fucking asshole. So why should I continue to hold the space for them? Thinking that maybe one day, if I continue to hold the space, they may automatically snap out of their assholiness and become somebody who's reasonable. They're going to have okay. So there's a part where holding the space almost becomes masochistic in some ways. Today's kind of one of those days. How much do you want to hold? How much do you want to be that container for people that are on the other side here? That's up to you, right? That's up for you to decide. And the thing about being in this body, and this is what we learn from Aries, is to be able to have as many of these things integrated so that we can respond in the moment from a place of clear knowing. With all this stuff integrated, like in the Jungian world, the most obvious thing would be the shadow. or in the Jungian world, projection, which actually comes a bit out of the Freudian world, right? So that all these things, all of these psychodramas have been, for the most part, resolved. You're not perfect, but you're resolved. And it allows you to be in that moment and to respond in the moment with the appropriate level of response. It may not be the complete response, but it's the appropriate. And sometimes the appropriate level of response is, I don't know. You don't have to know everything. I don't know. Or, that's above my pay grade. I don't know. And that's okay. Right? Being integrated or being individuated allows you to say to yourself, hey, there's some shit I don't know. And instead of, faking it or talking your way through. I mean, it's just a much more integrated response. You don't, just because you experience some degree of individuation, let's say a high level degree of individuation, doesn't mean you know everything, right? And sometimes those kinds of responses are actually quite liberating. It takes you off the hook, and it can take you off the hook for solving other people's problems. Although clearly, one of the things that humans love to do is solve other people's problems versus their own. But this is one of those days. Well, what happens when you're on the receiving end of that? Well, you get to figure it out. You get to balance out what somebody else is bringing to the table. Mercury's separated from Chiron a bit, about a 6-degree orb. It's still in there. I'd be interested in how many people had fractious disputes yesterday where somebody flew off the handle and invariably came back over to the Libra moon and said they were sorry. And they don't have to be Aries, it could be anybody. Because that's the other part of this, right? And if you're in this dynamic, you found yourself in this dynamic today, the best outcome of holding space for somebody is for them to realize, hey, look, I was out of line. I apologize for that. Our friendship, our relationship, our ability to get along means more to me than being right. And this is kind of, the last 24 hours have been about that. Do you want to be, do you want to be right? Or do you want to find some degree of common ground so that your relationship with somebody, which is, and again, sometimes relationships are meant to, go the way of, yesterday's news. But sometimes they're worth keeping around, whatever they are: friendships, professional relationships, partnerships, marriages, et cetera, et cetera. But that would be the ultimate outcome, right? The space is held. The other person realizes that, I was being an asshole. Yeah, I apologize for that. And, I thank you for listening to me and, not, coming back at me hard. Look, because I think it's fair to make a value-based judgment that people are going through a hard time. And it's not going to get easier. Like the intensity around this eclipse and the intensity around all the front loading of the eclipse. And people are sending me videos every day. This person saying this about the eclipse and this about the eclipse and this about the eclipse. And I'm getting the biblical perspective. I'm getting the Nibiru perspective. I'm getting all these, it's like this eclipse is sort of like the headliner for Conspiracy Central. Like, I think we could probably spend about 3 hours going into this eclipse and having it as kind of a root ball for just about any conspiracy that, we could unpeel under the sun. That's how intense it is. So there's a lot of tension in the air, and it's going to get more intense. And so today is an important day in that you need to remind yourself how to take yourself out of the intensity and find a balanced position in your own life. And that's just with the oppositions. We've got these inconjuncts, which we talked about the other night. The Venus in conjunct with the moon, Jupiter in conjunct with the moon, they're still there. And those are very interesting, again, for this idea of relationship. And sort of the hidden value. And I do think that there is some value for holding space. And it's with the inconjunct where it pays off. So hang in there, at least till we get to the Scorpio moon. And when it gets to the Scorpio moon and you want to poison somebody, then you can do it. But just wait. So we have the moon and Mars and Pisces. And of course, what do we have? We have a ship plowing into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It's a nice little Mars and Pisces incident, isn't it? Remember I said Mars and Pisces is the deluge. So I feel like we're on a path here between now and the eclipse where we're just going to start to see more weird shit. Like it's already stacking up. P. Diddy, fleeing on his private jet. The Francis Scott Key Bridge being plowed into. We'll get into that on 15 minutes. And a whole host of other things that are on their way. But keep your eye on the water. Keep your eye on the water and deluge, the breaking of dams. Oh, we saw the busting of a bridge, but the breaking of a dam. I think this is a really, really big piece here. Also, when you get into Saturn-Mars conjunctions in Pisces, you get into things like water rationing as well. I was just going through my brain and remembering what the Japanese, I don't know if they still do it, but the Japanese, whenever there would be an eclipse, they would cover their wells because they believed that the eclipse would pollute their waters, poison their waters. And that's just, ricocheting in my brain when I see this. All right. So there's your astro weather for today, focusing mainly on the island of sanity over there. Let's get into our True Hemp Science star of the day. And of course, True Hemp Science is your one-stop shop for all your CBD needs. And all you got to do is go to truehempscience.com. And let me go into, I always like to have the banner up. I have one banner. I have Bruce Banner here. There you go. So True Hemp Science is your one-stop shop for all your CBD needs, organically sourced and ingeniously crafted. All you got to do is spend $100 or more, type in 15MINS, and you will get a free goodie bag. And I guarantee you will like what's in that bag. It's a nice little addition to your order. $150 or more, get you free shipping. There's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. And when you go to True Hemp Science, if you want to make an appointment with our friend Chris, you can do that through the website, and he can answer all your questions about CBD. All right, let's get into our True Hemp Science star of the day. And that happens to be Mr. Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell is an interesting character. And one of the things we think about with the sign of Aries is uh, the hero, right? In Aries and Leo to me are the two signs that tend to be the most quote unquote heroic. You know, Aries is the warrior, and our culture is filled with stories, fables, myths, legends about warriors. Yeah, that's yeah, Alexander the Great, probably being right at the top of the list. He's a warrior. He's a warrior king. And warriors are what? Generally, they're heroes. You know, they capture. I mean, somebody you know, even like Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack's a warrior. He's a warrior. He's got to climb the giant tree, and he's got to snatch the goodies, right, from the mean giant. Jack of Jack and the Beanstalk is a warrior. He's a hero. So we think of Aries as a warrior and warrior as the hero. And what does the hero do? The hero faces its fears. The hero has trials, tests, tribulations along the path. And you don't have to be a man or a woman to be a hero and a warrior because you could, you know, it applies to both sexes. And it's interesting that the guy who wrote the hero's journey and the hero with a thousand faces happens to be an Aries, and not just any Aries. Joseph Campbell has a stellium, Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, and Mars, all in the sign of Aries. South Node in Pisces in a wide conjunction with the Sun. This is what Campbell's body of work is based on. And it is the understanding of cross cultural mythology where Campbell is able to connect dots, and that Campbell treads in the same archetypal waters as Carl Jung. And he's able to paint this idea of the warrior or the hero as an archetype. And of course, archetypes were the idea and concept of archetypes was pioneered by Jung, and how archetypes live and emerge from the collective unconscious. So Campbell is often thought of as a Jungian. I don't think he started off as a Jungian, but as time progressed, I think their ideas began to mesh, and Campbell clearly was an indirect student of Carl Jung. And you can see it right here, right there, with all the Aries. And Campbell lives kind of a heroic life when you peel back the layers of his life. He, I think he won some kind of a Fulbright scholarship or something like that to study in Europe. And when he was on the steamship crossing the Atlantic to go to Paris and study, one of the people that was on that steamship was Krishnamurti. So Joseph Campbell got to know Krishnamurti on his travel to Europe. Now, could you imagine being on a ship with Krishnamurti? I mean, I'd sit next to that fucker every day. It's like, what else can we talk about? What else do you have some interesting insights into? And that was young Krishnamurti. That was not kind of old, withered Krishnamurti, who was still a very interesting character. He also was a track athlete. If I'm not mistaken, he might have participated in one of the Olympic Games as a member of a relay team. So Aries, again, tend to be very athletic. He also surfed with Duke Kahanamoku in Hawaii. So Campbell has this really interesting life. And when you just look at his life, it's almost like the life of a hero itself. He winds up teaching at Sarah Lawrence, and he becomes this teacher of mythology. He marries a woman, I guess, Jean, who's a dancer. So you have Mars over here in the seventh house, and dancers are athletic. And so he marries a woman who possesses male traits, which is what you would see here with Mars in the seventh house. Also, the moon plays a huge role in his chart because we talked about the two signs that are most closely associated with heroism, and they're Aries and Leo. And he has the moon in Leo. And what has he got? He's got a sun moon trine right there. And Campbell's one of these guys that really does connect with sort of this collective imagination or this collective identity. And he did that with Bill Moyers, obviously, when Bill Moyers interviewed him back in the 80s. And what was the generation that I think really connected him with Campbell more than the other? It was the baby boomers. Like, he was their guy at that time. And the famous mantra was, follow your bliss. Follow your bliss. And clearly, an oft misunderstood permission in some ways. And later on, because of that, Campbell would actually have to clarify the following the bliss comment. And because he had seen that people were using it in a context where it's like, hey, do as thou will. He didn't really mean it like that. He meant that you needed to follow something inside of yourself, that when you did that thing, it gave you a sense of wholeness and completeness. But he didn't really say it in those terms. But that's what he was meaning, right? Now, what's interesting about Campbell is that there's a period when he comes back from Europe, he basically lands right when the Depression hits. So because his father he comes from a pretty well-off family. And they had a cabin in upstate New York. And the story goes that Campbell basically retreated through the Depression and read Bullfinch's mythology. And somewhere along the way, he meets up with Heinrich Zimmer's widow. And Heinrich Zimmer was one of the early cross-cultural mythologists. And Heinrich Zimmer's widow gives him all of his notes. And Heinrich Zimmer's work becomes the foundation for a lot of what Joseph Campbell would then go on to create in his own work. But it's that period where he separates himself out from the world. And it's that true node in Virgo in the 12th house, that 2-year period during the Depression where Campbell really begins to soak it all in. As a kid, he always loved Indians, right? They would, his family would go to the Buffalo Bill traveling circus or the traveling show, right? They would, so basically Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull, they would recreate the West. And they would have wagons and horses and shoot 'em ups and all this other shit, right? So he would go to those when he was a kid. And he went to the History of Natural Museum and Sciences in New York as a kid. And he checked out all the books on Native Americans and Indian mythology and stories from the local library as a kid. So this was a guy who was imbued with a purpose very early on. That would be the course of his life. So the true node is a really interesting marker when he took that time out during the Depression and really started to put things together. Um, the other thing that's fascinating about Campbell's chart is Uranus in the third house, which people who have Uranus in the third house have a bit of genius associated with him or with that quality. People that are inventors or patents have Uranus in the third house, and it's in a trine with Mars here, right? So that's the athletic ability of Campbell, but it's also, again, connecting Mars back to the warrior, connecting Mars back to the hero, and Campbell putting a modern spin on it, which is what Uranus is want to do. There is a bit of a glitch in Campbell's story, or quote unquote heroic armor. And there's this, you can find this online, and I actually urge people to download it and read it. It's a book called Changing Images of Man. You can find the PDF, and Campbell is one of the authors of this, and it comes out of the Institute of Noetic Sciences and Stanford Research Institute. It's like a co-publication, and basically, it's a map for how to change humanity's consciousness and to move them more into a collective experience or collective world, and further away from the individual and the self. And he's not the only author of Changing Images of Man, but he's in there, and his ideas. So a lot of the concepts of the Green New Deal, climate change, you can find them in Changing Images of Man. You have people like Dwayne Elgin, who also contributes to that book. Right, he's one of these, green screamers. So, if anything, I think that there is a bit of a chink in Campbell's armor, and you can see that a little bit in that Neptune Sun square. That ideologically he may fall prey to ideas that may sound good, but at the end of the day might be used for very different kinds of purposes. Okay, there's your True Hemp Science star of the day, Joseph Campbell. So, if you enjoyed today's show, meet us back here tomorrow at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. And please hit like and subscribe if you haven't. And if you feel like you'd like to buy me a cup of coffee, there's a link there down in the show notes. Since I am not monetized, people always say, geez, whenever I see Robert's videos, there's no commercials. Well, there's a reason why there's no commercials, because I'm not monetized. And YouTube probably doesn't want their sponsors to get a whiff of my toxic content. But you, on the other hand, get the straight, uncut version. So thank you very much for being here. Have yourself a blessed day or a blessed evening, wherever you are. And let's be here again tomorrow. Bye for now.